the lottery just happened recently, and I think everybody's like fantasized if they're like remotely involved in Melee and organizing, or like they're a fan. I'm pretty sure a large chunk of us have wondered, like, you know what if we had money and we could put it into the Melee infrastructure? Like, what would we do? So I think here's like my answer, and here are some of the goals that I would try to do. In terms of like, if I were to put a ton of money into Melee, like, what do I ultimately want in return for putting my money in? And I think what I really would like to see is an infrastructure that favors as many players as possible. The double elimination format, unless you have a ridiculously wide prize pool, really only focuses on the top like small handful of players, and it doesn't really focus too much on the 20th, 30th, and 40th ranked players. So I would love to design a structure that emphasizes the need for more players, so we spread the wealth a little bit more. The second thing I would want to do is try to create as big and as much of a sustaining structure as possible, that for every dollar I throw in, like it develops into something, so that it's not like I'm throwing money into a black hole. Like, I would love to have this last as long as possible. Now, with that being said, there are some big roadblocks that come in the way. So I want to make the assumption here that we have licensing rights to Melee, and that's probably one of the biggest issues on why like Melee can't grow and why it's this little niche game. I think if you look at Nintendo's business standpoint, I'm not saying this is the actual Nintendo policy, but I'm thinking in the perspective of Nintendo as a business. They have never disclosed anything to me to indicate this way, but Melee, I think, is tolerated to be at its current level. But if Melee were to grow to the point that it overshadows the newest games immediately when it comes out, then that's when it probably becomes an issue. And so I think Nintendo is okay with licensing to a certain extent. So the big question I would ask myself at this point is, can I buy the absolute rights to Melee? That I can license it, I could use all the IP at will. Now, I imagine in a realistic universe, that's probably not happening. Even if I threw Nintendo, like, let's say $500 million to $1 billion for all the assets and for full creative rights to all the assets in Melee, because there's so much unique IP in it with like Pokemon and like Mario and all of them, and Nintendo being very protective. Even let's say I threw $1 billion and I said, hey, I'm going to give you $1 billion to be able to use Melee's creative license at will. They probably would not say yes to that. Because of Japanese companies and how protective and stubborn they are. So with that being said, we are going to make the assumption that if I toss, I don't know, $100 million, even though that probably isn't going to happen, that I have the rights to distribute and broadcast Melee in whatever manner I see fit. So we're going to just throw that question out the window, because that is a very important question. But for all intents and purposes of this, we're going to assume we have that. I think one of the things I really warmed up to, and there are many issues with Clash Royale League. To give you context for what Clash Royale League does, each team fields like 4 players or so. 2 of those players play the 2v2. A third player plays the 1v1. And then the format has a King of the Hill format, where it's like a 3 versus 3, and if you lose, you're out, and you kind of roll down the rest of the lineup. And so like one person can sweep all 3 players if they win. It's similar to the Japanese Melee crew battle format that you saw with the Jack Garden tournament, where if you win your match against the first player, then you play the second player, the stocks reset. If you beat them, you play the next player. Or if you lose, then the second player comes in, and whoever loses all 3 players ends up losing. But I would like to see a format similar to a Clash Royale, or like similar to like the old school World Cyber Games or StarCraft with Warcraft 3 and StarCraft, where in Warcraft 3 you had organizations and they played 4 1v1 matches and 1 2v2. So I'd want to create a league around that structure. And why I believe that's very important is because with 4 1v1s and 1 2v2, you have teams more incentivized to be involved in the league. And what this ultimately also does, I like to say ultimately a lot for some reason, is that it gets more players a spotlight, and it gives more players importance as opposed to traditional double elimination brackets. So I would love to create a league with like 8 teams, and each team has to field, I don't know, up to 6 players, 4 for 1v1 and 1 for 2v2. And those players that play 2v2 can also play 1v1. So you may potentially only need 4 players, but you have 8 orcs competing against each other each week with the 4 1v1 matches, and each 1v1 best of 3 or best of 5 will get you 1 point, and the 2v2 gets you 1 point. And the reason why I would love something like this as a format as opposed to just running brackets over and over again is because I want to see not only just like 2 to 3 players get the spotlight, but like 40 players get the spotlight. And I think a structure like this enables that. We kind of saw that with Gods and Gatekeepers, so I would like to see that expanded. And I like the way that the Red Bull people were thinking in regards to this, because the way it works is that with FGC, with tennis, with any 1v1 sport, it really only structures to favor the rich and the people that are already the best. It doesn't highlight anything else. So that's the thing I would do. I would create an infrastructure. I would create a studio. I would love to create content around these 40 players and highlight them, and really push the narrative around 40 players as opposed to like the small handful that we get from Melee. I would probably pay orgs. If I were to win the lottery, I'd pay orgs to field these teams, to provide infrastructure, to provide team houses so that they can practice, strategize, and improve and push each other. So like I would pay each org to be incentivized to be involved in Melee. I'd pay a production crew. And ultimately, I'd hope that the broadcast could be brought to the next level. I would hire She and a few other people to create as many stat tracking kind of things to make it really nice and interesting. And in terms of commentary, I think we have a lot of great commentators, but I would love to see like kind of hosts from other esports. I would love to see people like Golden Boy and other people get involved, so that it really brings things to the next level in terms of production and professionalism. It's not to say like I would want to lose the banter or like the grassroots vibe. I would still like to keep those elements in with especially the commentary, but I think there's a lot to be said with a lot of the talent that exists within esports that we could use and utilize. And granted, that model already sounds very unprofitable, but it establishes and completes the goal of me wanting to create a structure that helps more players than the people who regularly finish in the top 4 or 5. And to make it exciting, I would create a nice playoff structure that has a large prize pot at the very end. Like the winning team gets like, I don't know, $5 million plus skins or whatever to contribute towards the prize pot. And I would also like to, mid-season, create double elimination brackets. So like players that do really well in open brackets, and this would encourage like an infrastructure of amateurs to like if they do really well in like the open circuits, they have the opportunity to get drafted and signed by the existing org. So we kind of have that back and forth infrastructure where like the barrier isn't completely separate from professionals, and like amateurs can see a path to becoming pro. I would love to see that happen. Now, all in all, like a lot of people would disagree with this approach, but that's just kind of like my ideal scenario of what I would love to see with like a Melee league. I know people from the FGC. I know people who are more about the grassroots open bracket. Anybody can beat anybody. Feel would heavily disagree with me, or like hate what I'm saying because it goes against the spirit of like the open bracket and the grassroots feel. But I think those would be really cool to have, and that's kind of how I would create a structure for Melee if I had the money and the choice and the options to do it.